Hey everybody, this is Jonathan from Brazil. I just wanted to pop in and say thank you for an amazing kickoff week. We are barely a weekend and we are almost at goal. So thank you all so much. We are humbled and honored and truly grateful that you guys have stuck with us all this time. I'm pretty confident that within the next few days, next week, we're going to get it across the line, and then we can start thinking about those stretch goals that we had, and kind of the extra stuff that we might be able to kind of like offer you guys once we hit our goal. So thanks again. We really appreciate it. We love you. This is our first crowdfunding project. We're learning. This is a learning curve for us, and you all have been very great about giving us suggestions and feedback and things like that. We're always willing and happy to course correct wherever we need to. So let's keep it going. So today I wanted to talk about the story behind the record. And when I say that, I don't mean like what it was like in the studio, or like, how we wrote this song or that song, or like the effects used. This is about the narrative arc behind the album, The Philosophy of Velocity. So hopefully it was obvious that, there's a story behind this record. I don't really like to over explain, my lyrics and things like that. I feel like it sucks the magic out and the mystery. So I kind of have been taking that approach for all this time. But 18 years later, I feel like there are some lines and some, connections that I want to make, and some Easter eggs and things that have been baked in since the very beginning, but I've just never really spoken to until now. And so I'm going to use this time to do a little bit of that. So the Philosophy of Velocity album takes place in this universe, this world called Husherville. And Husherville is this kind of liminal place. Maybe it's a town, maybe it's a city. It's really something that kind of exists almost in this dreamlike plane. I'm influenced a lot by films and film aesthetics and things like that. But when I think about Husherville and kind of what it looks like and feels like, Brazil definitely factors into that. Films like Dark City is another one, and Eraserhead another one, kind of where things are familiar but they're also not familiar. There's a bit of that sort of dream quality to it. That's kind of how I look at Husherville. And so in Husherville, there are a couple of key characters. The first one is the author, and the author is nameless. The author represents anyone who's creatively driven. So it could be me, it could be you. And this author is trying to write this novel and coming up against this huge amount of writer's block. And so what he decides to do to get through that and to break through that is to lock himself away in his apartment, basically, draw the curtains, cut off, contact with anyone and everyone, separate himself from everybody that he cares about and who cares about him, and just focus on the task at hand. But in doing so, over time, he starts to realize that he's kind of losing his grip on his own sanity. He starts to hear things, starts to see things, starts to hallucinate and things like that. And we kind of watch this play out through the record. Now, the record has kind of two categories of songs on it. There are the short stories, the short story songs, and those are kind of these little discrete vignettes, like Crime and the Antique Solution, which is about a time traveler, You Never Know, which is about a meta detective. And a lot of these characters, and the way that I kind of refer to them, you'll see them, and they probably sound familiar because of our pledge tier. So those are pulled out a lot. There's Candles, that the ghost comes from candles. Captain Mainwaring is obviously the captain, so on and so forth. And then on the other side, we have the frame songs, the frame stories. So songs like Vapors and Cameo, where you can kind of start to get this sense that the author is starting to see things and hear things, and things are kind of getting a little weird. And then all the way down to the big grand finale of Strange Days, which is kind of like this final break from reality that the author has. If you read the lyrics, they are incredibly absurd, and it's really just the author has finally just lost it. He has pushed himself too far, or something has pushed himself too far, and he's essentially gone insane. The other important character in this is someone that I call Oscar. Now, Oscar, if you can see him actually in the cover, he's this sort of ghostly, faded out person in the suit and the hat. Almost looks like a Magritte type character. And Oscar represents this sort of embodiment of this malignant perfectionism that is now haunting this author who's trying to finish his project. You could think of it as almost this dark Jungian superego or William S. Burroughs' Ugly Spirit. Basically, this sort of externalization of this perfectionism that is driving this author, mad, basically. And throughout the story, Oscar appears almost as this father figure. In the song Controller is probably Oscar's shining moment. But Oscar essentially is pushing and pushing and pushing the author to, really just overextend himself to the point where, he may actually lose it. Probably the biggest Easter egg of this whole album is the fact that Oscar is actually an anagram for on safecracking and rubella. So that's kind of a big reveal, something that I had dreamed up 18 years ago, but now you know. So there's a lot about these themes in this album that are kind of semi-autobiographical. Only speaking for myself, I think we as a band by that point, after all the touring on Hostage and everything, we were all in sort of a overextended place, like overextended financially and emotionally and mentally and physically and everything. And so by the time we got to Philosophy, we were feeling pretty stretched, pretty thin. And, just speaking for myself, my son was very small at that point, and I started to realize that like I wasn't home for him very often, and because that I was working so hard on the band and on the album and things like that, that I was actually disconnecting myself from him and his life and the people that I cared about. And so the philosophy of Velocity on an emotional level and on a thematic level is very anchored into what I happened to go through at that time. And so that's why this record really means something to me on a deep level, because it actually captures that sort of really kind of dark feeling, trying to figure out, like, how do I manage this sort of like creative drive without alienating everything and everyone that I love. There's a lot of background information in here that is probably not very obvious at all on the album. But what I will say is that in the final days of the band Brazil, my brother and I, Nick, who plays keyboards, we basically came up with this idea for a film scoring partnership, making film scores for films that didn't exist. And so we kind of called ourselves Poorly Built Men, as kind of like the project name. But our first official soundtrack for a film that does not exist is going to be called Husherville. This is actually a fully orchestrated companion soundtrack to the album. It's already been recorded. It's been recorded and produced and locked away for like the past 10 years. And I've really just been looking for the right time to kind of set it free. And I think this is probably the best time to do that. So look for that sometime probably next year. But in the meantime, we are offering a 3-song preview of this so you can get a sense of what it's like in our digital bundle that we're offering as an add-on or on one of our tiers. So check that out and stay tuned. See you next week in my next video where I do a deep dive on all the rewards that we have and hopefully answer questions like, what the heck is this Strange Days cursed cassette? So see you next time. Bye-bye.